I'm Katie Sorensen with the Center for Art and Wood, and just want to welcome all of you to our first new speaker series, How It Started and How It's Going, which features collectors and how they got started and why, and also how you could also become a collector. I'd like to start with a little housekeeping. We ask that everyone remain muted until the end of the program or asked to unmute. If you have questions during the presentation, we encourage you to add them to the chat. And when we reach the Q&A portion, I'll go ahead and moderate those for Joe. Before we go any further, on behalf of the Center for Art and Wood, I'd like to recognize that we are gathered on the surrendered ancestral territory of the Lenni Lenape people, who were and continue to be active stewards of these lands. We at the Center for Art and Wood work to hold the center accountable to the needs of Native American Indians and Indigenous people. For the first of this new series, I'd like to introduce Joe Seltzer, who is a woodturner and an avid collector of wood art. He's a founding board member of Collectors of Wood Art and participated on their board for over 12 years, and including a term as their board president. He has been involved in the annual local collaborative conference Echo Lake for over 2 decades. And if you guys don't know what Echo Lake is, I will be putting a link in the chat. You can check that out. And he's helped organize both their 10th anniversary exhibition, which was held at the Center for Art and Wood, and the 20th anniversary exhibition held at New Hope Arts. His collection currently includes over 1,200 objects, which is amazing amount of work. So with that, let's learn a little more about what he has and why. Joe, I hand it over to you.
Thank you. Let me get myself going here with the with my PowerPoint presentation. So I need to share the screen and do this and that and change it to
There we go.
slideshow. And that should be it. Okay. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I basically have 3 things I'd like to do today. By the way, if I don't know how you're going to know this, if I'm assuming that people can hear me, if you just kind of, a couple people just kind of wave to me so I know that, yeah, okay, everything's all right. So I have 3 things I'd like to do today. I'd like to tell some stories about how I became a collector of wood art, which I basically have been since sometime well, I started collecting in 1985. I became a real serious collector over the next few years, and I'll tell you some stories about how that happened. I want to give you a brief tour of my collection so that you can just, large wall, whole walls at a time, so you can see how I've displayed it in my house. And then the third thing is I want to focus on pieces that were made by people in the ITE program, or the Wingate, now called the Wingate Fellows Program, just because I have a lot of pieces from those folks, and I thought that would be an interesting way to kind of kick things off. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. So how did I get started collecting? I bought a catalog for the Jacobson Collection. I know that the Masons talked about that their first experience was the Jacobson Collection. Bud Jacobson was a collector in Arizona and put together a show that was at the Arizona I left it downstairs. It was in Arizona. It was at, I think, the Arizona State University Art Center, and they did a catalog for it. And I bought the catalog someplace, and I said, boy, this stuff is really nice. So the collection then traveled to the Renwick in DC, and Margie and I went to see it. I have to assume that my kids were along, given that it was 1985. I had two kids by that point. So um, I was just enthralled by the thing. And I said, you know, I've seen a lot of stuff like this at local craft shows. So I started going to local craft shows. And the first piece I bought was by Tom Densmore. And this is the piece. Now, I must admit, if I saw this piece today, I'm not sure I would add it to the collection. I kind of like the shape of the piece, but I don't like the coloration of the edges. The bark I mean, the edges don't look quite right to me. The shape is interesting. And the piece actually isn't all that well finished on the inside, but you probably can't see that. But this was the first piece I collected. So thinking about the structure of my collection, after I had acquired about 6 pieces that were all similar to or about the same size as that piece that you saw, which is about 4 inches high or 5 inches high, 4 inches high and a couple inches wide. I had gotten 6 pieces, and there was a professional conference in Boston. So I traveled to Boston and I found an art gallery there that had wood art and looked at it. And I ended up buying a piece that was much larger. And when I got home, I showed Margie the piece. And she said, well, she liked the piece, but it really didn't go well with the other 6 pieces I had. She was right. So I decided to try to limit myself to about 7 inches in height or diameter. And all of my collection now, which is over 1,200 pieces, fits that criteria, except a couple of dozen that for one reason or another are a little bit bigger than that, or in one case, significantly bigger than that. You will see some pictures later from the ITE people that don't meet that collection criteria. So this helped create a structure for me. It helped create a framework under which I could begin collecting. It meant frequently that I would see an artist and I liked their work and I would say, could you do something like that only a little bit smaller, and explain my criteria? And in some cases they did, and a few cases they didn't. I do not have a Stony Lamar piece in my collection because he told me that technically he didn't think he could make a piece that using the multi-axis approach he was using, he didn't think he could move the axis a small enough amount to make the pieces he was making smaller than he was making them. So I don't have a Stony, which is unfortunate, and I'm sorry about that, but that's the way it was. I tried to collect within 7 inches. So how did I begin to move beyond just going to local craft shows? Well, first of all, I began to going to national shows, the Philly Craft Show, the Baltimore ACC show, the Smithsonian show, and later a number of the SOFA shows in Chicago. That was the first thing. The second thing is I saw an article about Albert LeCoff that was in my local newspaper. And I tracked him down and called him and said, could I come in and see you? And he said yes. And so that was the first of many visits and the beginning of my education of real wood art. And then in 1993, the Collectors of Wood Art got going, and I was invited to Robin Horn's house, as were many other people, for an exhibit and a discussion about creating an organization. And I was a founding member, and I ended up being the secretary of the organization and was on the board for quite a long time. So those were the key elements in moving beyond just the initial, going to a craft show and seeing things I liked. One day Albert called me up and said, Rudy Solnick is staying with me. Would you like to come over and meet him? I believe this was in 1989. And I said, sure. I had heard the name, and I went and I started to talk to Rudy. I figured I'd be there about 10 minutes, 15 minutes maybe. But for some reason, Albert had apparently, although he didn't seem to remember at the time, had invited somebody to do a demonstration of a water filter. And so this guy came, and so Albert and the water filter guy went in the kitchen, and I ended up talking to Rudy in the living room for about an hour. It was a wonderful opportunity for me. I really enjoyed that. And I ended up buying this piece from Rudy that day. Later, Albert, or around the same time actually, Albert was talking about creating an organization, the Woodturning Center, and I offered to help write the business plan for him. And we went back and forth. He had been given some pieces by Bob Stocksdale, which he had for sale, but which were out of my price range at the time. And so he said, well, I'll give you one of the Bob Stocksdale pieces. You can pick one. And so I wrote a business plan. I wrote the original business plan for the Woodturning Center. And I got this wonderful piece that was a Stocksdale. A couple of other stories. I travel for conferences and vacations. And I had met Bill Hunter several times because he was doing the Philly Craft Show every year and the Smithsonian Show. And I knew he lived near Yosemite. And so in 1989, I was in California and arranged to go visit Bill at his house. I had that just before I went, I was at a conference and I actually won a prize, a cash prize, shared with a couple of other people, but nevertheless a cash prize for a paper that we had written that was considered the best paper in the journal that year. And so I had some winnings. And so I said to Bill, I got this much money to spend. What do you have? And I ended up buying this wonderful piece from him. I must say that I have bought 2 more Bill Hunter pieces since then. I think paid more than I did for this piece, but my understanding of how much I was willing to invest in my art collection had changed over the years. One other piece I wanted to talk about that's very early, and I think it was either the same trip or a different trip, I'm not sure. I went and visited Michael Peterson. He and Jean were living a bit north of Seattle at the time in a cabin. And it was like a single room cabin, a fairly large room, but still a single room. And they had beds over on one side of the room and a dining room table on another side and a kitchen on another side of the room. And they had some shelves up. And at the time, Michael's lathe was actually sitting outside under a tarp. And he worked outside to turn. And I said, I really like some of the pieces of yours that I've seen. What do you have available for sale? And I looked through his shelves and this piece just struck me. I liked the shape. And he said, well, the piece isn't finished and it has a hole in the bottom. And the hole is so small, you can barely see it if you know it's there. There's a burl eye that popped out a little bit. And so there's a little teeny hole. If you look through it, you can see the light, but that's about it. But he hadn't finished the piece because of it was not perfect. And so I said, yeah, I'm really interested in that. So while we're talking, he got some sandpaper and he's kind of holding the piece and rubbing sandpaper over it, which he did for a couple of minutes, just to make the grain line stand out. And then he took some wax and he went like this in his hand and then just kind of went over the piece and it was just wonderful. And I bought it. I couldn't buy it fast enough. So these are 4 early pieces in my collection. Well, 5 if you count the Densmore piece. By 1999, by 1990, I had met a lot of artists and I had acquired pieces and I just kind of went through to see what I had bought in the first 5 years. I had a piece by John Jordan, a piece by David Ellsworth, a couple of pieces by Ray Key, a piece by J. Paul, a piece by Mel Lindquist, a piece by Michael Mode, and at least 1 or 2 pieces by Al Sturt. I feel I had become a serious collector at that point. And just to kind of close this part of the story, here are the pieces that I just mentioned. And you'll see that they're all relatively the same size. The Ellsworth piece is the smallest by far. That was the largest Ellsworth piece I could afford at the time. But they were really nice wood turnings and really nice designs. And they're all among my favorite pieces still in my collection. And so by 1990, I felt like I had become a collector. I had a number of really good pieces, 10 if you count the things you've seen pictures of. And actually there's more than that. I had learned a great deal about the field from Albert and from meeting people at various conferences and shows and just talking to them and meeting other collectors. By that point, I really was very serious about being a collector. So I wanted to show you a bit about my collection. I basically have the collection in 2 parts, 2 places in my house. One is on the second floor of the house. On the first floor of the house, I have an office, and I now have 200 pieces by 200 different turners in that space. And on the second floor, I have what I call my gallery. If you can see me on the Zoom, I'm sitting in my gallery right now. There, including the hallway, more than 1,000 pieces up here. So I'll do a very quick overview. By the way, are you seeing on the left side of my screen, are you seeing the slides?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
Joe.
let
So
me
if you wanna-
switch
yeah.
that just for a second. What did we do? I think we did. What did we do for that, Kate?
So at the top, you want to click on from current slide. Yep, that one.
There we go. Okay.
Perfect. Looks good.
Except that's the first slide. So let me just run through them again quickly. Okay, so here's where we are. So on the first floor of the house, there are several cases of pieces, and you'll see that these are fairly densely placed. There's actually, in the middle, you see a cabinet with a door on it. There's actually one more cabinet like that on it couldn't get it all in the same picture, on the right side of the picture there. And then there's another small cabinet on the other side of the room that has a few pieces in it. But going back to this cabinet, they're basically 200 pieces by 200 different artists. And you can see that I like oriental display shelves. The shelves on the top up here and in the middle here are all oriental display cases. But this keeps the things kind of in the workspace that I have in my house. On the second floor, there's a room at the end of the hall. And so the hallway has 4 display cases on the walls, plus the mobile that's hanging there is from the First Echo Lake, made by all the participants. And then you walk into what I would call my gallery. And this is one wall of the gallery. And you can see again that I've got a number of Oriental display cases, including a lot of really small ones. And these are just filled with miniatures, some of which are mine, but most are other people's. And then this is the case, these two cases are behind me right now, and fairly full. And then this is another wall of the room, and you see that I've got plenty of lighting on these cases, and the small case on the wall is all Nikolai Osipov pieces. The two things on top of the middle cases, the left-hand side is just miscellaneous pieces, but the one on the right, kind of right here, these are all Ray Key pieces. Underneath the Ray Key pieces are, the top shelf is Hans Weissflog, and the next is Terry Martin and Jakob Weissflog, and then the next one is kind of miscellaneous, this one, but the three on the bottom plus this whole case plus this little thing over here are all collaborative pieces from Echo Lake and other collaborative events. This case has a wide range of things, except there are a lot of Mel Lindquist pieces in here, and the Al Sturt pieces are along the top, much of the top on this shelf. And you can just barely see a Mark's Fury bat over in the corner here. This is another wall of the room. This room at one point had been my office. It just filled up with stuff. So these are just a wide range of pieces. The segmented pieces in my collection are primarily in this area here. And a few of the larger pieces are up on the top. These do exceed the 7-inch standard, but all the stuff below it kind of fits into the 7 inches. This shelf is one of my favorite shelves. It's Bill Smith, who's a local person who does amazing segmented work. He's now retired as a wood artist. This is the final wall of the room, and again, I have a case with some small pieces in it and a bunch of little shelves in here with very small pieces. And let me see. Okay, so that's a quick tour of my house. Gives you an idea of how I try to display things. Basically, all of the pieces I own are on display, with the exception, I think, of 4 pieces, which are woods that I'm afraid might fade. And so they're in a box. And if I'm showing people my collection, I'll take them out, but that's about it. Some of the pieces are collaborative pieces. I have about 100 pieces that are collaborations, just to pick one example. This little shelf here was purchased as a single unit from Frogwood, which is another collaborative similar to Echo Lake that takes place in Oregon. And I was lucky enough to get that piece at the auction they have. Several of these pieces, the larger things, are pieces that came from Echo Lake, although most of the Echo Lake pieces are in the case I showed before. All right, so let me go on to talking about the International Turners Exchange. I really feel like I had this wonderful opportunity because I got to meet the ITE artists every year. There have been about 25 years of the ITE, and I did things between going to the open houses, occasionally having them to my house for dinner. And there were people that I met that I bought a piece from that was in the exhibit that the center did at the end of the exhibit, at the end of the summer. And in many cases, there were pieces that I bought when I saw the people later at a show of one sort or another. So I figured out that I have pieces by about 40 of the artists who participated in the 25 years of ITE. I bought on average about 2 pieces a year, not quite every year, but many of the years I bought 1 or 2 or 3 pieces. So I thought I would show you that part of my collection. So this is from the first year of ITE, 95, and I bought a piece by Todd Hoyer. Actually, I think I traded for this piece with the Masons. And I bought this piece by Haley, although I'm pretty sure I got it later than that, than 95. In 96, I got a Jean-Francois Escalin. This is called a Trembler, and it literally shakes as you walk by it. It's very thin. It's got very thin sections, and it will vibrate enough that it moves back and forth. Obviously, it's more than 7 inches high. It's about 15, 18 inches high. It's only 3 inches wide, but still it doesn't meet the criteria. But how are you going to get a Trembler? It's only 7 inches high. So, and Terry Martin. I have a bunch of Terry Martin pieces, all of which have this single eye feature to them. Something with a hole. Actually, that's not true. I have one downstairs that's not quite like this, but this was one of his styles. I found out later why. He told me at one point his father only has one eye, and so all the pieces he made had one eye in them. 97, I got a piece from Andrew Giddoes. Albert, you must remember all of these pieces. And a piece by Merrill. I have several pieces by Merrill. This one happened to be easily accessible. It sits on a shelf about 4 feet from me right now. And I love it. It's like textured in one half, and it's a flat plate. And just smooth in the other half. '98, well, I got a piece by Elaine Milan and a piece by Jack Slentz and a piece by Betty. Another one of my favorite pieces. This is just a very small, about 3 inches, and it actually is in 2 pieces, although you can see that they fit together. And it's very, for me, it's a very sculptural piece, as opposed to some of my collection is sculptural, but most of it's bowls and vessels and of one sort or another. This is just a sculptural piece, and I really like it. And I saw Betty here earlier. Remy was also in that year. And in 2000, George Peterson was one of the participants. Now, George doesn't do things small. He does fairly large things. At the time, he was doing a lot with skateboards and then working on the surface and texture of the skateboard. And one time I went to a show, I don't remember which one, and George was very excited to see me. He said, hang on a second, I've got something in the back for you. And he brought out this piece, which is actually 7 inches high, but it's 9 inches wide. And it was made for me. He knew that I did 7 inches. He didn't know I did only 7 I did 7 inches both ways. I was just delighted to have this, another sculptural piece in my collection. And Graham Priddle, another of my favorite artists, was in that year. This is actually a relatively recent piece, but the little boat that I have from the year that he was in ITE, is kind of waxed down in my downstairs area, so I didn't want to bring that one up. This is a piece by Mike Scott, again, a little bit bigger. I got this one on the secondary market, and a really interesting surface on this piece, very heavily carved and then burned. It's about 8.5 inches in diameter. This in 2001, Mark Gardner. Now, Mark did a bunch of these handled little bowls with handles, but I especially like this one because it's oval rather than round. And I just thought this was lovely. I have a couple of other pieces by Mark, all pretty distinctive, but this is probably my favorite of the grouping. So 2001, I believe this is Mark Rincourt. And in 2002, Rudiger Marquarding was there. And this is a piece that Rudiger had something like this, and I said, I really like that piece. And he said, well, I already sold it, but I'll make you one. And like 2 years later, I guess I got an email or something from Rudiger saying I have the piece done. He's used, I think it's pewter to, the silvery lines in the piece. And he was heating the piece and pouring the pewter in and then using that to cause it to crack a little more. And it actually took him a couple years to finish the piece. But I was delighted to get that in my collection. 2003, Eli Avicera from Israel was in the program. And I have a couple of his pieces. This is a top. It's a little lidded box, but you can see it's a really interesting top. He was doing these he was segmenting the piece in different woods and using that as the design feature. In 2004, Michael Mosho, who did this exquisitely small little piece. He did a lot of small things like this. And Andrew Petochnick. This is actually a somewhat later piece I bought in the secondary market, but he was in the show. He's an Australian turner. And Joel Urruti. Joel is primarily a sculptor. At one point he was making spheres. This is about a 6-inch sphere solid, and it's been textured on this one side. Also in 2006, Marilyn Campbell. I love her work. Done with wood and an epoxy resin. I have a couple of her pieces. I think they're really wonderful. Liam Flynn was that year, unfortunately no longer with us, but boy, did he do nice work. And Neil Scobie, who also isn't with us anymore, who again, I have a bunch of pieces of Neil's and really wonderful designs and carving in his pieces. 2007, Jean-Francois Delorme. I don't know quite where I got this piece, but I picked it up somewhere. And Siegfried Schreiber, I know I got this piece from the center. This piece has been dried very carefully and turned, and it actually is like a top. It'll spin for a while if you have it on a nice hard surface. And Derek, I saw Derek in the list of names. I have, I think, a dozen pieces by Derek, maybe even a few more than that. I bought a bunch of small ones. If you look at the shelf behind me, if you look on the bottom of the thing on the wall, the bottom shelf is all Derek Ben Como pieces. And a couple on the top are Derek Ben Como pieces, and I've got a couple more in another case, and so forth. Lovely work. I just bought a piece from Derek this last month, actually. Luke DeRue in 2010. Derek Weidman. This piece requires a little bit of discussion. This is the only piece in my collection that's actually representative of something else. All the pieces are abstracts at some level. And this one piece is a bird. I was so taken by the bird shapes that Derek did about a year ago that I asked him to make me one in my size range. I just thought they were wonderful. This is almost all turned on a lathe. Even some of the what looks like carving is done with multi-axis turning. He's just such a good artist and happens to be local and a friend. This is a piece by Kim Winkle, made at the Frogwood thing 2 summers ago, and I bought it at the auction. In 2012, Daryl Copeland was one of the artists, and I asked him he was doing things like this, except with about 20 of these little squares in them, hollowed out kind of squares. And I asked him if he'd do a smaller one, and he was very nice and did just 4 squares for me. Gaynor and Malcolm were a couple that worked together in 2013. This is a small piece of theirs that I bought. And Neil Turner, I think he just does wonderful work. This is a fairly recent piece of Neil's. I really like what he does. 2015, this one has got a story that goes with it. Zena was a chip carver, and among the things she made were spoons. And at some point, I met her a couple of different times. At some point, she had stuff for sale, and this spoon is about 10 inches long. And I said, it's really nice. I really like the spoon. Could you make me a smaller one? Now, that's a question I had asked people a number of times. And mostly they said yes. Occasionally they said no, but usually they said yes. A few people said yes and never did make it. But Zena didn't answer. She just kind of thought about it for what seemed to me a really long time. And I was trying to figure out, why was it taking her so long? Well, a few weeks or a month, I don't know when, later, I got the following spoon from her. It's chip carved, and this one is actually 6.5 or 7 inches long. And it's exactly identical to the other one, except the chip carving way down here, which was real small on this one, is like about the same size as the chip carving up here. And she somehow had to figure out how to chip carve it even smaller down to this point. Here's a close-up. You can see how small the chip carving is on the top spoon, and now go down to the bottom spoon and see how much smaller even than that it is. So I was so taken when I got the second spoon, the small one, that I bought the first one just so I could tell this story. I couldn't believe that she had to figure out how to chip carve that small. I don't think she'd ever done anything quite that small before, but she did, and it's a wonderful piece in my collection. Grant Vaughn was in the same year. And I skip a year or two in here. There were no Woodturners in one year, and another year that nobody that worked small enough for me. And then in 2017, I met Max, and I bought this piece from Max, and I've subsequently bought 2 other pieces from Max. I just thought that he's doing really nice work. He's an Irish turner. And Jason Snyder was in that year also. Now, Jason doesn't turn wood, he turns cardboard. And I just thought this was interesting. So I bought this. This one I know I bought from the exhibit. I don't think I bought Max's piece from the exhibit, but I certainly bought enough pieces over the years from the ITE exhibits. And that's it. So I'm going to stop sharing. I would be happy to talk with people and answer questions or listen to your comments or whatever. So
Joe, that was fascinating. So thank you so much for sharing all of these wonderful pieces with us. We do have a pretty small group. I think that we could open it up to people verbally asking questions. We do have one question from Carolyn Picchiotti. She's asking, how is chip carving done as with Zena's piece? So
I will try to answer that a little bit, but it may be that somebody else knows more about this than I do. She uses a small pointed tool, which she puts down into the wood with point down kind of at an angle, and then just kind of flakes off a little section. And she's so good at it that they look perfectly made, but they're actually chipped out of the wood. Anyone have anything to add to that? Because
we do have.
Yeah, go ahead.
We do have some chip carving tutorials on our gathering website, the Woodshed. So I can put that in the chat if you'd like to watch that and see a little bit more what that's about.
Yeah, it's beautiful work when it's done. It's amazingly well done.
I have a chip carving knife here.
Oh, terrific. Can't see it, John.
Well, let's see. You can't see me at all?
I can't.
Oh, let's see. I need to turn
the video on.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, I happen to be sitting at my carving bench right now. Hi, Meryl. So these, does that show up okay?
Yes.
Yep. Okay, these are chip carving knives. And while I'm not a chip carver, and I'm not going to even attempt to do that, the way that would be used is if you imagine little triangles, it's pushed in from 3 sides, and all of those cuts then converge, down into the chip, and the little chip pops out once it's been cut in from 3 sides. It's basically stabbed into the wood 3 times, and one little chip will come out.
And they're really sharp too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there are various sorts of them. She uses 2 or 3 different ones, but this is a one chip carving knife here. I just happen to have that. Sorry.
Great, thank you both.
Joe, has anybody ever sneezed in your gallery?
Oh yeah, me all the time.
What's the average piece loss?
Very, very small. One of the things I like is things with glass doors, because it keeps the dust down on the pieces. I must say, if you were to look around, you would find a lot of dust in this room right now. And I like things I could cover up or close the doors to so that they don't need to be dusted very often. But yeah, anything that's fragile or not real stable is waxed down. I'm careful about that. So you saw the Raid key pieces that are up high on a shelf. They're all down with wax, and the whole oriental shelf that it's sitting in is down on wax too, so that it won't move. So far, I have only slightly damaged one piece that I know of.
So Joe, it's Jeff Bernstein. I have a question for you. So aside from your size restrictions, what inspires you to keep adding to your collection now?
I see things that are really, really nice. Hang on a second, I'll show you. These are the two pieces I most recently purchased. This is a small piece done by a local turner named Mike Kuderbach. And if you look, you'll see it's actually 7-sided. Now, it's not easy to figure out how to do a 7-sided piece, but Mike figured out a design to do any number of sides, which he demonstrated actually last month on a Zoom call. And I was so taken by the idea that I called him up and I bought this 7-sided piece from him. So just something that's really interesting to me. And the second piece is one that I got from Derek Bencomo. And Derek, if you want, you can say some more about this piece. I love the different shapes that this created. Most of his pieces sit on feet, and this is in his deconstructed series. So he actually took a finished piece and cut it apart and moved that to a different spot. And now it sits in many different orientations. And I just was taken with the piece. It's also pink ivory and quite pretty, but the idea that it could be, it was multiple pieces is what appealed to me. There's some turners whose work I specifically like a lot, and so I've gotten pieces by them. There are new ideas that come out that occasionally I've looked to try to get something by that person because it's just a new idea. What mostly I'm looking for is a piece that it has the artist's voice to it, and most artists have kind of a signature work, and they keep doing that. Although a few artists, the signature work keeps changing from time to time, real significantly. Like Christian Bouchard's work has changed radically through about 8 or 10 different signatures that I could identify, signature pieces that I could identify. And I have many of those pieces, except for the ones that are larger.
And it could be,
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was the live feed was coming through mine for a second
Oh,
there.
okay.
But we do have Jamie Ann joined us a little bit late, and they just want to know a little bit more about what inspired you to start collecting. And well, you are located here in the Philadelphia area, so.
The fact that I could go to the Woodturning Center, and Albert will remember how many times I did that, certainly was an important piece of this. For the first number of years, I went to Albert's house, which is where the collection was, and hung out there a lot and saw things and looked at pieces, and also looked at and met people at shows. And in about 93, the Collectors of Wood Art got started, and that became a real important source. And as I look around the screen right now, I see Judy, Chernoff, and Steve Keeble, and it must be some other people that were part of that group. And certainly there were artists who were part of that group, Betty and Meryl, and Derek, and of course Albert. And so those became opportunities to meet people and talk with people and collect things, and it was, I like art quite a lot. I have some other types of art in my house, but nothing like this collection. So.
Do you think that your relationship with certain artists causes you to, collect more of their work?
Oh, yeah. I have about close to 50 pieces by Hans Weisflog. Now that's a function of two things. One is I like Hans a lot. I met Hans at one of Albert's events fairly early. You remember when that was, Albert?
1993 at the World Turning Conference.
The World Turning Conference. I met him. And I just enjoyed talking to him. And the second piece of why I have a lot of his pieces is I taught in Switzerland a bunch of times. And when I would travel, I would fly to Frankfurt. And just by chance, several years I managed to make it work out so that it overlapped when the Frankfurt Fair was, which was a large kind of trade show that Hans and later Hans and Jakob were showing their work at. There were really no other artists at that show. It was mostly equipment and stuff, but they were showing art. And I went there and I bought pieces from them. One of the things I found was that there was a European price and an American price, and the European price was much less. And I bought a lot of pieces from them at those shows. And mostly it's because I like the people. I have a really nice collection of John Jordan pieces. They're on the shelf, on the Oriental shelf behind me, across the middle. I bought a piece about every year or two from John in the early 90s. He was coming and doing a show in the Philly area. I think you were doing the one in Lancaster, if I remember correctly.
Long's Pond.
Yeah, and every year I would go and I would find something, and I like the variation in the pieces, and yet the similarity of them. They all feel like they fit together really nicely. John is one of the people, when I said, would you make me a somewhat smaller piece? He was doing, let me see if I can get my hand on it real quickly. Yeah, I showed this piece a minute ago.
John, I say you try and sell him the piece you're working on right now.
I should. Look at
He's
this.
due, man.
That's his size.
He was doing these hollow
Little
forms.
bottles, yeah.
Yeah, bottles with very small openings. You see
Look
how
at
small
that.
the opening is?
Look at that.
And what he did basically was to make it through an opening that was this size and then drop this piece in on the end and to hide it with texturing of some sort or other. Very nice pieces. Anyways, do you remember you were doing ones that were about 10 inches big and bigger? And I said to you one year,
Yeah.
could you do me a smaller one? And this is the smaller one. And I
remember
appreciate
that
very much.
the red piece was the first one you ever bought. I
The
think.
the red one.
I think it was the red one. I remember we met at Long Pond. Oh, you couldn't hear me. We met at the Long Pond show.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, is this the piece you were
That's it.
talking about, the
Yeah.
red piece?
Yeah.
This actually says 1990 on it. And you can see it's really pretty, it's got a beadwork all around it and a really pretty collar. And the bottom actually signed on a gold base, but it's signed 1990. This piece is signed 1989.
Okay.
So this is actually the first piece of yours that I got.
Okay.
And this is a much plainer piece. But anyways, I have this nice collection of John Jordan pieces.
Thank you, Joe.
The fact that
Yeah,
either
you-
of you can remember that is totally frightening.
Yeah, well, the fact is John still owes me a piece.
Well,
Joe, we're getting close to the hour mark, and I wanted to close with Betty's question.
Oh, sure.
She has a great question. She's asking, what is your hope for the future of your collection? It's a really good question.
That's a really difficult question to answer. I assume I've been giving pieces every year to the Center for Art and Wood from my collection, so I'm assuming I will give a significant number of pieces at some point. The small technical problem in that is that if you give a series of objects that are art objects and it adds up to more than $5,000 in a single category, you have to get them appraised. So I have given pieces that I had to get appraised because the value of the piece was more than 5,000. There are several pieces that I've given to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, one to the Carnegie Institute of Art in Pittsburgh, where I grew up. And I had to get those appraised, professionally appraised, and it costs some money to do that. A lot of my pieces aren't actually worth individually 5,000. Very few, if any, pieces are worth 5,000 individually, but if you put them collectively, then that's a problem. So I am planning to give some pieces every year, but I also buy pieces every year, so I don't have a simple answer to that. That is a collector problem, a collector issue, how to dispose of the collection. I want to say before we close up that I am a retired college professor, and I used to stand up in front of the class and talk for long periods of time, and it has been a pleasure to actually just kind of just wander around and talk for a long time. I don't get to do that anymore. So I thank all of you for being here and for your attention. I would be happy to answer questions. My email is seltzer@lasalle.edu. And I think a number of you know, a few of you don't know, and I'd be delighted to answer your questions or anything else too. So it was really nice to see all of you.
Joe, I thought you would show your latest addition to the family.
Oh, no, I am now a grandfather. My
Wow.
my daughter had a son, Benjamin, less than 2 weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
How many of us are proud owners of a Joe Seltzer piece?
Oh, that's a lot of you.
I have a couple of dozen, maybe more.
I have one.
Well, thank you for sharing your work with us, Joe.
I have had a really good time making things, and then having the second piece of pleasure to be giving them to friends. So I'm sure many of you will get more over the years, assuming that I get to see you again soon. So.
Joe, thank you so much for being our very first collector for this new speaker series. Just amazing work in your collection. Thank you for sharing that with us. And everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. And we look forward to having you join us for our next program. And if you missed some of this, you can always check out our Facebook page. It's streaming live there, so it's immediately available. However, this will be packaged and will be available on our Woodshed, which is our gathering website. And you can always check out what's coming up on our Instagram page, follow us, check out what we're posting. We've got Sam, I know here, who does all of our social media. Thank you, Sam. And it was a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon, everyone.
Thank you, Joe.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
People I didn't get to say hi to, hi. I see a bunch of people there.
Thanks, Joe. Bye.
All right, bye, everyone.
Bye.